Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health specialists talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. This week, I have a special guest episode, not a licensed mental health professional, but mental health adjacent, somebody who I love their work. I've gotten to collaborate with a little bit. We'll get into that. And who's filling a gap that, here in America, we have lots of gaps for mental health. So mental health adjacent guest this week. I'm joined by Sammy from Haram Doodles.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having
Hey,
me.
Sammy. Yeah. I think let's start talking about Haram Doodles. What's that?
Sure.
I think for people who maybe I follow you on Instagram, other folks who are tuning in, what's Haram Doodles? How'd that get started?
Yeah. So Haram Doodles, the word haram means forbidden in Arabic within the Islamic context. And so I started Haram Doodles in March of 2022. So we are at my 4-year anniversary now.
Hey,
Insane.
happy anniversary.
Thanks. And so I had deconstructed Islam. I had still been like researching, reading all the things. And for a while I kept going, I got to do something about this. I have to talk about this in a way that supports other ex-Muslims. It, yes, becomes a cathartic experience for me, but it also, I wanted to provide some way of relaying Islam and the Islamic experience in a different way. Because more often I would see a lot of people doing videos of themselves, sharing their journeys. They would share lots of photoshopped memes. And I was like, oh, I think there's space for some original content. And so I went back to my childhood love of drawing and something that I had stopped doing for years and years and years. And finally I was like, fuck it. I'm going to just put it out there and see what happens. And I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard this before, and far be it for me to make comparisons here, but I think I was raised evangelical, right? And so I knew of the Naked Pastor before I found your work. But I see a lot of overlap between what each of you sort of do. Maybe it's a style thing or just that original content rather than spreading memes. Memes have their place, certainly.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, that little bit of like lived it for a long time, experienced it after deconstruction, doing some commentary about it in a cathartic way.
Yeah. And I actually love Naked Pastor. I started following him immediately because I was just like, it's so cool. I like other artists that are using their skills to put out their content that really like what I really love about art is being able to like infuse it with humor and humanism. Because a cartoon or a comic or even like simple drawings like Naked Pastor does, like simple black and white, just they're so powerful because it lets people see an idea from a completely like different angle, but then also something that felt really sacred and unquestionable starts to look very human, even though it sounds absolutely absurd and bonkers. And yet you can still go, okay, yeah, I totally understand this. So just simplifying a lot of this sort of the deconstruction down into very simple visuals is what I was wanting to go for.
We're going to come back to the forbidden part. Was the doodling part of like healing for you? Was that a reclamation practice for you? What was sort of like, I'm just going to draw and put it out there?
Oh, I like that. I think it was a reclamation practice because, you know, as a kid, I was obsessed with art. My parents kind of right around the age of puberty, they were like, all right, you got to get serious about Islam. Got to stop drawing. It is haram. The belief is that Prophet Muhammad had said, you know, drawing living beings and animals, like cursed are the people that do this and they're going to go to hell. And he was afraid of other people worshiping other creations at the time when people were worshiping a lot of different ways, right? And a lot of different gods and and they showed up in statue form and drawn form. And so something that was said back in the 7th century is now affecting me personally and a lot of ex-Muslims that are told not to draw living beings. And so that's why unfortunate incidents like Charlie Hebdo have happened. I've drawn Prophet Muhammad, but I think I make him in a nice way. So
Yeah, well, right. So from that outside perspective, I mean, I'm a millennial, so the South Park
yeah.
episodes that
Yeah.
got pulled, I think, eventually
Mhm.
by Comedy Central. And what you're referencing is sort of these events where somebody published artwork of the Prophet Muhammad, and that.
Right.
So, but you're saying the forbidden part is just drawing living creatures writ
Yeah,
large.
living beings. And so that's why Islamic art has a lot of sort of patterns, geometric patterns,
Sure.
flowers and motifs. And so they've really kind of excelled in those ways. But it takes that little bit of imagination, creativity, and self-expression away from everyone, because the minute you can't draw something that you see in the world, it kind of, I think it takes away a little part of your creativity.
Yeah.
And I love doing that. I used to draw like my family members. I used to draw pretty much like anything around me, right? Like an apple sitting there, I'd, draw something else. And so that was just a practice I had, and I actually loved it because even in school, I was practicing a lot of that artwork. And I was really glad that even though I had to throw away all of my art materials, and like my parents said, get serious about Islam. You can't mimic Allah. How dare you recreate his creations? And so now that reclamation practice for me is being able to draw everything that, that I was told that
Yeah.
Allah created.
Yeah.
Even pigs that are considered haram, or right, like even Prophet Muhammad or Allah himself.
Well, and it's
So,
I mean, that's such an, I don't want to cast too wide of an aspersion here, but it's such a weird prohibition
mhm, mhm,
because artwork isn't inherently worshipful.
right.
Um, and again, it's a weird limitation to put on because it's, I love, I followed your work for a while and have known you for a while now too, but the sort of like, you joke like you make the art like you did at that age when you stopped, like your
Yeah.
brain just waited for you to pick up the hobby again. But like, I can't draw people. I can draw all sorts of animals. I have young children. I do a lot of cartooning, and like, I can't draw people to save my life. And like, nobody would look at a picture that I draw of a frog and be like, "That's really great." They'd be like, "Did your boys make that?" Like, "Oh no, I'm a
Is that
37-year-old with multiple degrees. That's
or are
me."
they like, is that a booger or is that a frog?
Right. So, it's such a
Joking.
weird and like almost like a dehumanizing thing, right? Like you're talking about,
Yeah.
it's very natural to see the world around you and then make sense
Right.
of it in your own way by drawing it.
Right.
And, as a neurodivergent person, like doodling was how I passed the time. So cartoony sort of drawings. I was real big into drawing wizards battling each other. That was how I got through a lot
Oh,
of
cool.
boring classes.
Yeah. I doodle a lot in classes too, like all over my notebooks,
Yeah.
any paper I found, I would be doodling. And even though I was stopped at home, I'm really glad I went to an American public school where I still had access to art. So every year I was still practicing art in different ways.
Yeah.
And so I secretly still was like, "Ah, at least I get my fill in school."
So was that a thing that you had to navigate then? Sort of like, I'm assuming taking public school classes, you had art coursework, you had homework, you had
Yeah.
projects you had to do. Were you in your
Yeah.
head as a child like, I can't take this home? Or were you like, I can't draw
Yeah.
that because I'll get in trouble? How did you sort of navigate that?
I think my parents, every Muslim family navigates Islam a little differently. I think my parents, because it was for school or for university or whatever coursework it was for, I think they kind of gave that a pass, but didn't want me spending my extra time doing that,
Okay.
and wanted me to kind of, read the Quran more, pray 5 times a day, keep up with like the sort of the, what is it to be Muslim? I needed to do that a
Yeah.
lot more. And I think, and especially when a lot of girls hit puberty, we go from like being a girl to womanhood, like like it's like a flip. And
Mhm.
so that was another thing, was like I was starting to experience life actually as a girl before that, it was all like fun and games. I even asked my mom like why dinosaurs weren't in the Quran, and she was like, "You can't ask these questions. Whatever's written in the book is it." And so it went from like this sort of very creative, critical thinking, imagination sort of path to suddenly this gender bias path. So
Can
yeah.
you, because I have a lot of experience with ex-evangelicals, and I think a lot of my listener base is probably more familiar with the ex-evangelical side of things. Can you sort of
Mhm.
frame for us where, I mean, this is your interpretation, but where your
Yeah.
family was, and like, was it highly controlling? Do you think it was a pretty average experience? Do you think it was more of like a, I don't know, I don't have a good example. The example I
Yeah.
like to use is Catholics who only go to mass on Easter and Christmas, but still call themselves Catholic.
Yes.
All the way to sort of
Yeah.
like that fundamentalist, as we would refer to it, very controlling, very rigid. Where did your upbringing sort of fall in your perspective?
Probably somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So we were definitely kind of like we just mentioned, like Catholics going to mass on Sunday. A lot of us just went for the Friday prayers, and grew up going to like Eid prayers, for example, after like Ramadan, or the Eid where the next Eid, the second one that happens, and so we do go to Eid prayers and stuff. Um, I think even though my parents didn't force me to wear the hijab at home, I was still expected to wear it during praying,
Mhm.
expected to wear it at the mosque, expected to wear it at, if we were going to like uber religious people's houses, I have to wear it then too. And so it definitely, there were ways that they navigated it, which with whatever they thought was right. Traditionally, like our family, like the women never wore the hijab, but we still had to cover. Like I could not even wear this t-shirt at home.
Yeah.
I couldn't wear shorts, I couldn't wear tank tops, I couldn't wear anything that was low neck, so there's definitely lines. I was also like, I didn't have the right to they get, I'm glad that my parents believed in education for all of the kids, for me and my siblings. And at the same time, there was a very big difference in terms of what that education was going to get us. And so yes, I had access to education, and the motivation was, oh, you're going to get a better, marriage proposal if you
Yeah.
are more educated. Whereas, for my brother or like the guys in the family, it was more about, okay, you have to work and you have to earn for the family. And so that was a huge difference. And I started noticing that like pretty much right away.
Yeah.
Um, we were at home, we were told to pray 5 times a day. Did we do it? No. Not all the time. It was always like constant like fight at home, like pray. And it's
Sure.
like, oh, fine. So you close your door and you pretend that you pray. You call it a day. So there's definitely a lot of that too. I had to fast during Ramadan. That was always expected, all 30 days, unless girls have their period or if women are pregnant. If you have like a reason, like you're sick, you don't have to. But I would extend my period dates just so I would not have to fast a little longer than
Sure.
what was
Yeah.
there. And Ramadan's actually going on right now. It's supposed to end in a day or two. So yeah, so that's been it was kind of in the middle, right? Like there was some control on dress and movement, mobility, autonomy, but then
Mm.
there was some flexibility there as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, what was, um, I'm trying to word this. What, when you were making sense of like, hey, my siblings get treated differently based on
mhm.
gender, is there also like a birth order thing? I know you don't share a ton of personal data, so I'm not trying
Yeah,
to go super deep here, but like, where do you fall in the birth order? Was there a difference
yeah,
from that? Did
for
your older
sure.
siblings maybe get it worse than you had it?
I don't know if they got it worse. I have 2 other siblings. They're older than I am. I'm the youngest. And I moved to the US when I was like 7-ish years old. So
Mhm.
I've always felt like I've like pretty much like as if I was born here. Like my
Yeah.
life has always been in the US. I don't really remember too much from before as well. And so I think a lot of it had to do with gender for sure. my brother getting a lot more freedom and access, whereas I think my sister and I definitely got less of that and had our rights and access withheld. Like rights are there. Like I could go out and get an education, but if my parents tell me not to, my access is being withheld in that moment. And
Yeah.
so I always kind of separate the two, because we often hear, and I used to say this too, that Islam gave women their rights in the 7th century. But what we have to, like, what I understood after deconstructing and leaving Islam was that we have rights and then there's access to those rights. And so
Yeah.
there's certain things that Islam doesn't even give you the right to do. And then there's certain things that we have the right to do, but our families or communities withhold that access. So
Yeah, that's sort of like coercion, where
yeah.
technically it isn't being taken away from you, but also you don't have free access to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What sort of started your deconstruction process?
Probably as a kid, kind of questioning things along the way. I think there was a moment in time when I was a teenager where I heard my brother say something along the lines of like, "Oh, but men are allowed to marry 4 women in Islam," and I was like, "Bullshit! That can't be true." Like, just I was so like upset about that, hearing that, and I had finished the Quran already. I had read it in Arabic and I had it in translations, and so Urdu is the other language that I speak, and so I, but as a kid, none of that really sticks or makes sense. What sticks is like what your parents are telling you to do, or what you sort of mimic what other family members are doing. And I argued. I was like, that can't be true. Like there has to be a reason. There was a battle, and they were doing it because there are a lot of like widows and orphans that needed a home. So you make up all these sort of like what I call mental massage gymnastics to like explain that. But I think once I became an adult, started going to college, what was really cool was this university had a lot of classes on Islam. And I started taking those because I was like, easy A. That's brilliant. I'm totally going to do this. And so like I actually minored in religion.
Yeah.
But those classes ended up being really difficult because you don't learn any of the objective history, the why things were done, why were wars led, who were the caliphs, like all these sort of details that you start to learn. And that's when, but I was also taking classes in like sociology and feminism and like all these other like mass media studies. And so it really sort of culminated for me. And by the end of college, I was like, okay, I'm done with organized religion. I was still calling myself a cultural apologist Muslim, I guess, in that way, where I hadn't really sort of looked into it enough to go, I don't know if I really want to do all these things, but my identity is still tied as an ex-Muslim or as a Muslim. Mm-hmm. And I think it wasn't until I met my atheist partner, who is also an ex-Muslim, that sort of gave me the intellectual and emotional safety to be able to talk about all the things that were in my brain that I hadn't even talked to anybody about up until that point. This was just me doing my research, going through classes, thinking these thoughts and reflecting on my own until I meet him. And I'm like, shit, he's an atheist. And I wonder what his thoughts are. And I think that just became such a great way in those moments, it was like 2 ex-Muslims just sitting there crying, laughing, like talking through all the things, because of course he experienced Islam very differently being a guy and being in a different part of the world. I experienced it very differently being a girl and being in a different part of the world. And so that became like a really safe space for both of us to just deconstruct even deeper and further than what we had done already. And ended up finding the word ex-Muslim together. And we're like, that's exactly what we are. It's like this sort of statement that says, I no longer want to or need to practice Islam. And so, and I know a lot of, ex-Christians, ex-Jews, ex-Sikhs, like there's so many others out there that kind of feel very similarly in that way. And so, that like, it was years of like discussing this. It wasn't just like, a few weeks or months. It was like years of continuing to talk about how things came up or what we experienced. And I think for him too, one of the things that he kept seeing was girls in his family and extended family not being treated the same way as the guys were, and their rights being withheld. And he kept going, why? What is so different about girls and women? And what's so different about me besides just the gender? And that was it. It was the gender.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
it really, I think it gave me that, like, we joke around like we gave each other therapy in that way, because it just
Yeah.
gave us so many more moments to talk through and like unearth all the harm and the abuse and trauma and all the things that we had experienced through life.
Yeah. Well, and I think in my work with people who are deconstructing, or people, I see a lot of people who are either in the process of questioning or who have recently left.
Yeah.
And that community is what is really important, because you lose the community you had access to, and you don't always have one
Mhm.
to replace that yet. You don't always have a soft landing place. And so it sounds like you and your partner were sort of that community for each other, and like you had
Yeah.
this safe space to talk, but you also had that
Yeah.
shared language. You had some of those shared experiences. So
Yeah.
sometimes I will get clients who love their therapist, but their therapist doesn't know what they're talking about when it comes to the religion they were raised in. And
Yeah.
it's just helpful to have some people who like get the language,
Yeah.
or
And
like
that lived
understand that,
experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
that reference or that acronym
Right.
or that thing your parents always said, because everybody's
Right.
parents in that religion said that. Like
Right.
there's that helps to be
Um,
like, oh yeah, I'm not crazy. I'm not doing anything like wild here. This is
yeah.
normal.
And I think what's so scary about it too is that, you're taught you cannot leave. You are born a Muslim. And so Muslims believe that you are biologically born as a Muslim. Every child in this world is born a Muslim, and then it's up to the parents. So if a child is born in a non-Muslim home, it's still up to the parents to teach them, the right way to live.
Yeah.
And eventually, the hope is that even the non-Muslims will one day become Muslims. And that's actually taught in Islam. That Islam will one day become the only religion that everyone will follow before the world ends, right? So there's that too.
Yeah.
Um,
Got to have the
and I
apostate
think,
somewhere in there.
yeah, absolutely. Armageddon, all that stuff. And I think for me, what was really scary was just, first of all, even coming to terms with the fact that I was questioning these things and continuously questioning. And in the same breath, I would like say to myself, Allah, forgive me for having these thoughts, for having these questions, for defying you, for, disbelieving in the things that you have given to us in this book. And so I was continuously also doing that too. I was reflecting, but I was also like so scared that I was going to go to hell, and what happens after we die.
Yeah.
And that's also why apostasy laws exist in a lot of Muslim countries, and they exist in our homes. Those apostasy and blasphemy laws are absolutely in our homes, because we're stopped from either leaving the religion or saying anything about it that could cause, that would offend anybody. But that is exactly what I am trying to do with Haram Doodles, is to, we need to have our freedom of speech and freedom of expression,
Mhm.
freedom of and from religion. These are, I have the privilege of living in the US with these laws around me. And and yet, even then, we're experiencing this in our Muslim homes, that there's apostasy laws and blasphemy laws that we're like still navigating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it's so wild, because again, when we study like cult tactics, when we study coercive control, limiting access to information is one of the like main
yeah,
pillars of that
right,
behavior. And so these
right,
laws are all prohibited so that people cannot make an informed decision,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And if we limit what people say bad about it, then other people won't hear that, and if other people don't hear that, then they'll stay in this religion. And like, I don't think it's particularly unique or interesting, but I think this segues into some of the work you're doing now outside of Haram Doodles. But the the way that Islamophobia was handled in the United States then also sort of serves as this like blanket defense, where criticizing
Mhm.
Islam and criticizing some of those practices gets swept under this wide umbrella of like, oh, well, that's Islamophobia and we don't do that, so you can't say that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Islamophobia is kind of like the 21st century anti-blasphemy law. It operates that way. And I think that's what's scary, is that, I've actually sat through DEI trainings at work, and, I've actually been trained in DEI.
Mhm.
Um, and I was training others in those concepts as well. And also in the back of my mind, I kept asking these questions about, okay, we're learning, for example, about like the social of like how you get socialized, and then this like the circle of liberation. And in my mind, I kept going, I know we're talking about America and sort of white supremacy, all these concepts, but then I can't help but to think about Islamic supremacy and Muslim fragility. I was sort of like flipping these concepts that I was learning in DEI trainings
Yeah.
to like give me some of that language to understand, like, this was exactly what I was dealing with and I was reflecting on as well. Um, and oftentimes in those spaces, you couldn't really talk about anything else but what was going on here in America. So
Yeah.
like there was no space for me to go, okay, let me reflect this on about my own community. And I think that's where some of this work falls apart, is that we only focus on sort of one community and one majority,
Yeah. Well,
and we're not allowed to give ourselves the space to like kind of do those reflections as well.
yeah, and I think once you
And it's
start
necessary for sure. All of
for
that is
sure.
necessary.
And once you start studying like power dynamics, whether
Yeah.
it's in the context of like a certain racism, a certain
Hmm.
ethnic privilege, whether it's religious supremacy, whether it is whatever, once you're looking at power dynamics, we can replace white supremacy here in America with
Yeah.
Islamic supremacy in a country where that is the privileged status, right? It's about
Right.
who holds the authority, who has
Yeah.
the power imbalance, who gets that top slot in a
Yeah.
hierarchy, which is unhelpful, right? That's not how we should
Yeah.
organize. But like those power
Absolutely.
dynamics are true. That's a human experience. That's how we
Yeah.
as social creatures sort of take advantage of those things. That's why a lot of organized
Mhm.
religions will follow the same patterns, even if their doctrine, even if their dogma is different in detail, its
Yeah.
function serves a lot of the same purposes. And so,
Absolutely.
again, in other countries, it's not white supremacy, but it's a religious supremacy or it's a different
Yeah.
ethnicity supremacy because it's
Yeah.
whatever group has that privileged status, whichever group has that authority.
Yeah. And I always say, ex-Muslims don't have an irrational fear. Our anxiety is not irrational. Our stress
It's
is
not
not
a
irrational.
it's not a phobia.
Exactly. It's a
Right.
very rational sort of journey that we have out of Islam, and we ask very smart questions along the way, all of us. Regardless of that question, the minute you go, something doesn't sound right here, we should have that ability to be able to ask questions and also go, this sounds like bullshit. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to do it anymore, and have that freedom to walk away. And I think that's
Yeah.
exactly what we're trying to fight is um, that we need to have that freedom. We need to end these apostasy and blasphemy laws, regardless of the country or the home that they're in, because
Yeah.
we hear all about like apostasy blasphemy laws in like Iran or Afghanistan or Pakistan or any of the Muslim countries, and we experience that here in the US. We experience the
Right.
exact same thing. Like even in homes, in mosques, amongst really religious family, you're
Mhm.
experiencing Islamic supremacy here as well. And
Yeah.
so it like I think those DEI trainings gave me a lot of the words and a lot of that sort of like reflection on social justice and power and privilege. How does leadership show up in those spaces? How authoritative is it? And so
Yeah.
it was a really great opportunity for me to like, while I was reflecting, deconstructing, to kind of sit in these spaces and go, holy shit, this is exactly what I've been like trying to like get to, and I didn't have the words for it.
Yeah.
Because I had noticed even that sort of, I've created this doodle. It's like the Muslim privilege triangle, and it's basically within the Muslim community. There's a bunch of different communities, right? And even Muslims are super diverse. Even within Islam, there's a major sect of Islam, which is Sunni Muslims, and that's the sect that I grew up in. And
Mhm.
then there's all these other sects. But I also grew up seeing that these other smaller sects didn't have the privileges that the Sunnis did. And so even that was like, why is that? Why are they treated differently? Why aren't Shias given as many rights and the same rights as Sunni Muslims living in this country? And so I think even that, like picking up on where were people sort of experiencing Islam in such a different way that
Mhm.
they basically had to fight harder for those same rights that Sunnis had.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so it was just, yeah.
I think when you study liberation philosophy, when you study feminism, which again is generally speaking not about gender, I'm
Yeah.
oversimplifying here,
Yeah.
but it's about power dynamics.
Yes.
And again, it's called feminism because it's people speaking to patriarchy, which has been the dominant
Right.
privileged
Right.
space. But these things that are questioning power, who has the power, and like why?
Yeah.
Why
Absolutely.
does that person have the power? What gets to be said and what isn't okay to be said? And you're talking about your
Yeah.
forbidden content, right? Like
Yeah.
who decides what is forbidden and what isn't is what you get in these things. And again, religion didn't invent that.
Right.
Religion takes advantage of that. It's a very
Right.
human thing.
Right.
Religions have just sort of structured it and made it their bread and butter, where
Yeah.
the organizing principle is in-group out-group dynamics.
Yeah.
You're the
Yeah.
chosen, you're the select, you're the saved, you're the correct
Mhm.
version of our religion is all
Yeah.
in-group out-group dynamics.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, definitely, even for me, it was like, I was definitely feeling like the out group, right? Like as a girl and woman growing up, I was just like,
Mhm.
there's such a huge difference in the way Islam is for men and women. And, uh, it's sort of like you start to fight for your own rights before you even learn about feminism. And I think
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened with me was that like before I even knew what feminism meant, I was doing that. I was literally sitting there going, wait, why can't I travel 2 hours to go work somewhere? Or why can't I work in another city? And it always kind of came back to, well, no, like, who's going to protect you? We got to keep you safe. There's horrible men out there. And, but it all
Yeah.
like those ideas, sure, they come from all different parts of cultures. And religion creates its own culture too. And so that's
Mhm.
the religious culture is the purity culture for girls and women and also literally for everybody else too. And
Yeah.
so
Well, and that like language flip that happens a lot in power
yeah.
dynamics where we're doing this to protect you, but like
Mhm.
you're getting your freedoms, your rights taken away. We're doing this
Right.
for your benefit, but it's actually to keep someone else in control.
Right.
We're not policing the men. We're going to police the
Right.
women because of the
Right.
men.
Right.
Um,
And even like just the victim blaming, right? Like, you hear things like, well, why were you wearing that? Why well, you should have covered yourself more. And so even hearing those things, it's coming from Islam, it's coming from religion, it's coming from that purity culture that teaches you that like you existing tempt men.
yeah,
And so in order for you to not do that, you need to cover yourself. And it just becomes a vicious cycle over the years. And I'm really grateful that I had a lot of different people around me. I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, diversity around me all the time. And so I think and I was always very curious to learn about different people. And so
yeah,
I became friends with random people. I would also wonder why they would be going to hell.
right.
Like, I'm sitting there having a very great conversation with like a friend of mine who's Jewish. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, holy shit, she's going to go to hell. She's going to burn. I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and I I sort of chuckle. I mean, we see a huge dip. I don't know if this is true for Islam as well, but
Mhm,
certainly here in America, certainly for the generally larger sects of Christianity, huge dip in church attendance and membership in the early 2000s because the
mhm,
internet became a thing.
mhm, mhm.
And so when you look at in-group out-group dynamics, it was really easy to limit the flow of information and to keep people from interacting with
Yeah.
your neighbor who's Jewish or this kid who's
Mhm,
from a different country than you grew up in when
yeah.
the internet wasn't a thing. But suddenly, when we had access to a lot of information in the world and a lot of different people, it became harder to do that. And
Mm.
for people who maybe weren't questioning some of those things like you were as a kid, to say, yeah, but like that person's my neighbor's awesome. Why would they go to hell? Right.
Right.
Um, And I think the internet,
and that's such an innocent question too, right?
yeah, yes.
Regardless of
Well,
the age you ask it.
research suggests children are naturally altruistic and also like super helpful across all demographics, and that we're just awful as a species and teach them how to be bigots around age 5 or 6. But yes, children are naturally altruistic. I think I don't want to out you here on the podcast. I can cut this if you need me to. But
Sure.
you're neurodivergent, right? You were
No, I have never been diagnosed.
okay.
But I do
I
have
should,
family who
yeah.
are neurodivergent. Yeah.
Which also I think I hear this story so often. The reason I'm bringing it up is because so many people who are neurodivergent are really good at pattern recognition and
Mhm.
then like questioning things that are social norms because it doesn't make sense. So our brains are trying to make it make sense. Like, but
Yeah.
it does lead to like, why can't girls do this thing when boys can? Why can't this thing, you know? So it's
Yeah.
recognize the pattern comes really easily. And then also being like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. So if I have to follow
Yeah.
this rule, I need you to explain it to me in a way that makes sense. Otherwise I don't want to follow it.
Right.
Um,
Right. And not
and
even
like,
having that option of like, I don't want to follow it. Well, tough shit. You're gonna have to follow it anyway.
yes, that was very much my childhood of being like, that's dumb. And they're like, all right, you're going to do it anyway. Um, but that I get that so much from people who I'm working with. I mean, neurodivergence is one of my specialties. So I work with a lot of late
Yeah.
diagnosed folks, but like a lot of them saw some of these patterns, and religion, so many rules sometimes is helpful. I talk about
Yeah.
that. Like, I don't know how we would have done in school if I wasn't so scared of disappointing my parents or going to hell because I was
Mm,
super late diagnosed, but I was a
yeah.
good student because I always sort of had that, like, but if you mess up, that's really
Mhm.
bad. You're going to be punished forever for that, which isn't
Right.
healthy. And also, I do think some of those rules were helpful for my unmedicated, undiagnosed neurodivergent brain as a kid to
Mm.
follow some of the rules that were like pretty arbitrary. Otherwise, I've been like, nah, I don't want to do that.
And that makes
Not
sense.
worth
I
the
think it like do you feel like it kind of gave you a structure that, the routine structure maybe that helped?
yeah, for sure. I think definitely my 8-year-old has my brain and is a little
Mhm.
neurodivergent human being. 5-year-old's hard to tell right now, but like there's a much healthier way to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like our boys go to a Waldorf school, it's very tactile. Our 8-year-old has a lot of accommodation, not a lot of accommodation, some
Sure.
accommodations. The school's been really great, letting him move around and do things different with his body. So I
Mhm.
sort of look at like, yeah, was, the hell trauma that I experienced and all the things that I dealt with worth it? No, like I could have had structure elsewhere.
Right.
But again, I think for that time and place, being a kid who grew up in the 90s, being in, high school and college in the early aughts, like, yes, I think it kept me
Yeah.
on a certain like success path. My family also really prioritized education. So I
Mhm.
like got to go to a good school and private school. So I didn't learn a lot of things. But like then I went to college and a public university. And like that was not when I left the church, but when
Mm.
I learned a lot of things that I wouldn't have had access to
Yeah.
anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
And,
definitely like
and
that for me was such a I in hindsight, I'm so grateful that I had access to that, right? Because it's
mhm.
like you learn so many different things that you're like, "Holy shit, I didn't even know any of these things existed." I even took a dinosaurs class in college because I was still fascinated with dinosaurs.
Hell yeah. Dinosaurs are awesome.
Um, and I get it, like, I think it definitely gives you a lot of structure. It gives you sort of something to like, a purpose and a mission, and, you can kinda see that vision as well of like, "Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
like, I wanna go to heaven, I wanna be a good kid," but then you start to realize that a lot of it is so based on obedience
Yeah.
and right, and, like, asking for permission and, like, I felt like I had to constantly ask for permission to do anything.
Yeah.
And so just that power dynamic to continue to navigate that through your life it's such a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I think I talk a lot about like goldfish sort of you can, get a goldfish as a pet and you're going to feed it and provide for it and keep it safe from predators. but goldfish also like keep growing their entire lifespans.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you make them a pet, they stop growing. Whereas if they're in the wild, they will grow their entire lifespan. And so I think
Yeah.
that's sort of how I talk about the structure. Like it did help
Yeah.
me personally. I don't think it was worth the cost, but I also think like it really stifled my growth at some point too.
Yeah.
Where the rules became really restrictive. And I probably should have left the church then. And it was, again, that like fear of hell. What if I'm wrong? That kept me doing the sort of like more and more progressive thing until I finally was like, yeah, I just don't believe any of this. But yeah, those rules and structures can be helpful for a little bit. When I worked at a low-fee clinic before the Affordable Care Act and things, and people didn't have insurance back in the day, especially people who were struggling with mental health issues. A lot. I'm in the Midwest. I saw a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses who had undiagnosed or unmedicated mental health issues because JWs have so many rules. It provided a bunch of stability for them that seemed functional, and then it would really hamper their ability to get well in a sustainable way because they couldn't get meds or they couldn't do certain jobs, they couldn't date certain people because, again, then those rules became really restrictive. Obviously the medication one's pretty bad, like if you're dealing with something like bipolar, and those rules are helpful for a little bit and then you can't do your medication. So I definitely think there's a limiting factor where like that ceiling hits and those rules start being really unhelpful really quickly.
And I think the kind of what you said, just the instability that you feel after leaving a religion, and just like, as if like someone pulls a rug from underneath you and you're like, oh shit, like now what do I do? Who am I now? What do I believe? What are my values? And so even just realizing that over the years, I think as a Muslim, my top two values were probably obedience and piety. And now my top two values are like freedom and safety. And so even just, I think that shift in values is definitely a really important part of what sort of pulls us out of religion and gives us a little more stability, because you kind of go, okay, I don't need this, but now that I value, for example, freedom and safety, I can put my brain into other things, or I can find another purpose, like, I don't know, working for a nonprofit or doing anything else but religion.
Those values shift sometimes those values just need to get renamed. We need to understand that the value isn't because some scripture told us to, but because like that's who we are. I've always rooted for the underdog, so like working with marginalized communities has always been really aligned for me. That's not because the Bible told me to, that's because that's who I am, right? And so sometimes it's like reframing, oh, this value has always been there for me. What does it look like when it's not under the umbrella of religion?
Right. And I think leaving sort of a high control religious system, sort of like, it's not just like a change of how you think about things, right? Like that intellectual side, but I feel it's an emotional and social one too. And so like once you leave, you're sort of rebuilding your sense of self, your worldviews, your perspectives. Even your circumstances change a little bit because you're just not thinking about things from that religious perspective. And so even through like, just even when I think about like Haram Doodles, like what I had hoped that like the art would communicate that, like, questioning isn't something that we should be ashamed of. Neither is leaving the religion. All of these things should have been okay. And we're here speaking openly and publicly as ex-Muslims because they're not okay. And that we want to be able to, like, have that sort of hope to build a world that we're allowed to leave, we're allowed to freely express ourselves, we're allowed to talk about it without fear or consequences.
What has community looked like for that? Because, understanding that was part of your idea behind starting your account and putting this stuff on the internet for other people to see. What was it like for your deconstruction? I mean, in the evangelical world, there's thousands probably of podcasts about deconstruction and questioning and stuff like that, but there aren't some of those apostasy laws and some of those other things that can really dampen or hamper speech. So what's that been like in the ex-Muslim community? What have you sort of seen in the past couple of years that you've been doing this work?
I think for sure, like early 2000s to like, I want to say 2010, 2015, maybe a lot of the internet, right? Websites, people were still very secretly writing and sharing and things like that.
Yep.
Once YouTube came along, I think that just changed the game because I think that allowed a lot more ex-Muslims to, and especially ex-Muslims that were not living in Muslim countries. They were
Yeah.
living in Western or democratic countries where they had the freedom of speech. And so they're able to actually talk about those things very openly. So a lot of women that were ex-Muslim, like Mariam Namazi, there's another person called Infidel Noodle. There's a lot of us that like they are the ones that sort of gave me the courage to go, you know what, I think I can do this and I can just be a slightly different and one more voice to be added to the ex-Muslim community because our community needs a lot of support as any ex community does.
Yeah.
And I think, before the internet, questioning or leaving religion could be a very isolating experience. And it absolutely is still.
Mhm.
But now someone in one country could discover thousands of people across the world asking the same exact questions or reflecting on the same exact experiences. And so, like I love the fact that we have we have our qualms with technology, and at the same time social media definitely has created that sort of like informal support network for people
Yeah.
going through deconstruction. And along the way, all these stories, your podcast, my doodles, all of that helps people realize that they're not alone and that
Mhm.
we're doing our part to help build some of that belonging back up for them, and that
Yeah.
people realize that that there's so many of us that are out there that experience things very similarly and very differently too, right? Because the ex-Christian community is not a monolith, neither is the
Right.
ex-Muslim community. No community is a monolith. And so I think internet sort of became that first place for a lot of us to realize that we're not alone. And what a freaking great time to be alive, right? Like,
Yeah.
we actually
What's
have these tools.
Yes, the internet, when it's not driven by tech fascists and algorithms out of our control, can be a really lovely place. Um,
Oh, yeah.
what sort of your experience? I don't know if you keep track of this. Maybe we'll get into your mental health here too for a sec, but
Mm,
you post regularly some of the nonsense that believers still send you,
mm.
and some of the apologetics they try and convince you of. What's sort of the ratio of people reaching out to you with like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found you. This makes so much sense. I'm glad that somebody's posting about this versus like the fear mongering, the hatred, the bigotry that gets sent your way. What's sort of the mix for you?
Oof, that's a hard one. Some days it's like a 90-10 where it's 90% love and 10% hate. And some days it's like 90% hate. So it fluctuates. And also, I would say, I think generally it's been very, very supportive. Both
Mhm.
that support and the backlash exist.
Yeah,
Depends on the day sometimes, and depends on the doodle sometimes too.
sure.
Because at the end
Yep,
of the
that makes
day,
sense.
all right, like all these algorithms, they've been largely built by white American men,
Mhm.
and a lot of bias shows up. And so these algorithms sometimes don't really know the difference between an ex-Muslim and a Muslim.
Yeah.
And so I often see Muslim content in my newsfeed. I
Mhm.
ignore it, I hide it, I mute that. I do all those things to kind of keep the triggering to a minimum.
Yeah.
And I get ex-Muslim content triggers Muslims. And so
Mhm.
there's, some write very privately and they DM me asking like really lovely questions, ex-Muslims, that reach out to me with like a lot of love and support.
Yeah.
And I also get really horrible, horrible hate from Muslims who are really upset about me being public and me drawing these things.
Yeah.
And I think because satire and art are such great tools in challenging religion, but it also attracts criticism. But
Mhm.
that reaction itself shows how strongly some institutions resist scrutiny, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm going for.
Yeah, some of the unhinged comments you post that you'll share are just like, again, the fragility of people who are claiming to be secure in their faith is always surprising to me.
Right,
Um,
right.
how do you as a content creator, how do you as a functional human who uses the internet take care of your mental health while sort of being in these spaces? What do you do for grounding? How do you sort of navigate, like, how much is too much time online? How much is too little? How do you sort of
Yeah.
balance that?
I had a really cool opportunity at like previous years ago, few years ago, to work with an organization that also had a mental health clinic. So I learned a lot of things from mental health professionals just by, proximity.
Yeah.
And one thing that, boundaries always sort of stuck with me, because first of all, I was noticing like people created boundaries in the way they practice Islam.
Mhm.
And now that I was an ex-Muslim, starting Haram Doodles, I was like, I need to create boundaries for myself, even in this space. I've created boundaries for myself being an ex-Muslim. Like, I have stopped going to religious gatherings. I no longer, like, if we're at a family gathering and if people start praying, my husband and I, we will excuse ourselves and we will find each other outside. And
Yeah.
so there's ways that I've created those boundaries for my personal life. And then I was like, you know what? I need boundaries for this work too. So the one rule that I made for myself 4 years ago and have stuck to is I will never talk to Muslims because I'm not there for them.
Yeah.
My audience is ex-Muslims and ex-religious folks, and I will stick to that. And so that has been the greatest mental health rule I have ever created. And I'm going to toot my own horn for that, because
Yeah. It's a good
that
one.
that's that saves me so much stress and anxiety of trying to respond and reply to all these sort of like hateful comments that I'm getting.
Mhm.
And I'd rather spend my energy speaking to other ex-Muslims and ex-religious folks that get it. And so that for sure is one really big way that I practice mental health through the project that I'm doing. And
Mhm.
then the other ways I also do is like, I'll be online and then I shut it off and I kind of go about my day doing all the things. Sure, I'll check back in here and there, but I largely kind of shut myself off from it during part of the day as well.
Yeah.
Um, Doodling is very cathartic for me. So that
Mhm.
experience in and of itself of me just sitting there with my iPad and stylus and actually just drawing is is sort of like my moment of reflection, and of me going, okay, what of my thousand ideas that I've written down, what can I draw next?
Yeah.
Um, and that sort of becomes a really great way to practice that too, because I don't want to overwhelm myself either with the amount of content. And I want to kind of
Mhm.
just take it day by day and also do what feels right for me. Like, sure, there's all these days that come up and I will draw something, like I drew something for Valentine's Day, but it was totally not about Valentine's Day. It was about just the aspect of love. And
Yeah.
so I think that's another way for me to just practice good mental health, was disconnecting and connecting when I felt the time was right. And then also just going, it's okay. Like, there is no emergency. I don't need to respond to these things right away. And I can
Yeah.
take my time to do that.
Yeah.
So just some of the
Yeah. I
ways that
think
yeah.
don't feed the trolls is always a
Yeah,
good
exactly.
a good thing on the internet. But it is interesting, as like a straight passing white dude on the internet who says a pretty like I'm pretty outspoken about religion being
Yeah.
harmful. Um, I get a lot less hate than a lot of the female ex-religious content creators, a lot of the female
Yeah.
voices in the space. And again, I think that speaks to just some of like the inherent misogyny that's in
Mhm.
a lot of these religions, that's like baked into it. It's the water these people are swimming in, because they're far more
Yeah.
likely to comment on a female content creator's page than they are mine, even if I've said like way more horrific things about their religious choice. Um,
Yeah.
so again, I think it is really important. I love just even the idea that like you're doodling and you're making these things, but doodling in and of itself is still good for your mental health. And like that's
Yeah.
also important when you're doing something like content creation, because it's like, yeah, it can turn into a job. It can turn into this thing that you have to do it, and it sucks the fun out of it sometimes.
Yeah.
And like
Right.
being able to say, this is why I do it. I do it for me, or this population is
Yeah.
still very important for me. And being able to like connect to it joyfully keeps it healthy for you
Yeah.
too, instead of being like a grind culture mindset, which doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have for example, like I have a t-shirt shop, I have a coffee page, but like I don't really publicize that much because I don't get paid by anybody to do this. I'm just doing this
Yep.
for free. I'm doing this because I love drawing and I'm so glad to be back into it. I've also like just the fact that I've been doodling for the last 4 years, like even like my art has improved. My lines have gotten a little steadier than before. So there's like I even noticed that much of like, okay, like I'm actually drawing better than I did before. And I think for me, moving forward, I just I've met such amazing and incredible people through all this
Mhm.
work, having joined Borgenicht Fellowship with you, you know, and meeting such incredible ex-religious leaders here in the US. My partner and I created a website called ExMuslim.me, and that's basically a story sharing website. I was inspired by querying the map. And that led me to create exmuslim.me because I was like, that's such a great concept. And oftentimes, ex Muslim voices are so, like, sort of not heard much.
Mhm.
Even in America, if I, you know, have told anybody that I'm working with or friends that I'm an ex Muslim, they're like, what is that? What do you mean an ex Muslim? And
Yeah.
so they may have heard ex Christian, but the word ex Muslim still like doesn't register. And
Mhm.
so that's been really important for me too, of like, how do I continue to do this work in different ways and
Yeah.
beyond doodling?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And that
grateful to
site
have
is
these
where,
opportunities.
yeah, people can go and share their stories and see
Yeah.
where other ex-Muslims are geographically. And like, yeah,
Yeah.
that stuff is it's so helpful to see other people's stories, and it's helpful to like look at a map. Again, like it just sort of grounds us to see
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we're not alone.
Right. And so many stories coming out of Muslim countries where it is like so scary to even talk about these things. And so,
Yeah.
um, you know, and like an ex-Muslim said to me that like they'd been holding on to their story for 40 years and they
Wow.
finally had the chance to write it down. And so just even hearing these things, and I was like,
Mhm.
I know there's so many ways for us to tell stories because of technology and the tools that we have. And also I wanted to provide one sort of very visual map of stories so like people can see that we exist all over the world. And oftentimes, Christians like to take the sort of like, oh, ex-Muslims, look at all of them are Christian suddenly. And so that data that we have in there is really helpful because that shows that like very few of us actually convert to another religion. Majority of us
Yeah.
remain agnostic or like become atheists. And so I think that was really helpful as well to kind of be able to like humanize that data a little bit. Like how many of us like represent identify as men and women, how many identify as trans, how many identify as LGBTQ. So really ensuring that people were able to see themselves in that data as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. Rich people listening to
Thanks.
my podcast. I don't know if you exist, but go pay Sammy to do artwork.
Thanks
Um,
for people.
Redistribution of wealth is ethical. Um, it's a wonderful segue. I'm a terrible actual podcast host. Um, if people want to learn more about you, if people want to support you, if people just want to connect with your work, where do they go? How do they find you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, all the social media channels at HaramDoodles, and then HaramDoodles.com as well on my website. So, and if you want to reach me, Instagram DM is a great way. So, yeah,
Yeah. Awesome. Sammy, wonderful to chat with you, as always.
same.
Thanks for doing all the work you do and talking about some of these topics that I think in ex-religious spaces probably don't get talked about enough.
Yeah.
So awesome work that you're doing, and wonderful
Thank you.
to get to talk to you about it today. Thanks for
I
coming on.
know. Same here. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and appreciate the work you're doing. I think there are still too few therapists in the world, and we need many more. And so,
Facts.
thank you for being part of that community.
Yes, for sure. And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again this week. We will be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.